So this one's called writing shorter setups. What I find is very important that you take my joke structure some way or another, get it out of my books, do one of my on-demand classes like Joke Writing Made Simple, take one of my other classes. Everything for me starts with joke structure. People say, well, how do you shorten jokes? How do you rewrite jokes? How do you fix jokes? It all starts with joke structure. It really does. The real point is that once you understand the mechanisms of joke structure, you can do almost anything with jokes. That model allows you to have so many other skills that we'll talk about here, some of them right now. So joke structure, a lot of people don't realize I coined the term joke structure. I coined it many years ago to explain the mechanisms that connect the setup and the punch. Setup and punch aren't joke structure in my world. That's the way we express one-liners. We also express humor through one-liners and through sketches and through cartoons, through sitcoms, through movies, through poems. Setup and punch is one of the ways we express humor. We can call it joke structure if you want to. It's fine to some degree. So first of all, I'm going to introduce you to three of the mechanisms right now. Here's the first one. At the center of everything for joke structure is one thing with two meanings. This is the ingredient that helps to really define joke structure. This is required at the center of all places where we laugh at humor, not laugh at tickling or nervousness and stuff like that, but we laugh at humor. There's always one thing with two meanings or interpretations. What the setup does, the setup establishes the expected meaning. One thing with two meanings. One of those meanings is the expected setup that will come from the setup, and the punch will have the unexpected meaning. This triad, these three mechanisms are really important because that helps you understand joke structure. There's a lot more going on inside of jokes than just these three things. Yet, these three are required. So it's a place to go to begin to start identifying jokes and understanding jokes. This is where I get everybody to start. One thing with two interpretations. One of the interpretations or meanings is expected. The other's unexpected. First, you can identify jokes. I'm just going to show you how to do this. Here's Emma Willman. I worked with her privately. Look for the one thing with two meanings. That's where it all starts.
I've got ADHD. I was diagnosed in high school and I was prescribed Adderall, which was a godsend because my grades were able to skyrocket because I could finally focus on trading my Adderall for the test answers. That's what happened, yeah.
Let's look at this. She said, my grades skyrocketed because I could focus on trading my Adderall for the test answers. So what's the one thing with two meanings? It's what she could focus on. That helps you understand the structure of this joke. What she could focus on when she got the Adderall. We had the expected meaning. What she could focus on was studying to improve her grades. The unexpected meaning was that she could trade the drugs, Adderall, for cheat sheets. Now we start to understand this joke because of joke structure. These mechanisms at the center of this are the three things you look at to start to really understand jokes, because it's really hard to fix jokes or work with jokes at all if you don't know where the joke is or where the joke gets lost in overwriting things. We're going to do another one. Here's my student, Anthony Jesselnick.
My brother's crazy. Even my neighbors hate him. The other day I opened up the door, I caught him masturbating. He looks me right in the eyes and goes, "Shut the door." I said, "Get inside."
All right, here's the breakdown of this one as well. He said, shut the door, and I said, get inside. What's the one thing with two meanings? It's where the brother was masturbating. The expected meaning was he is in the bedroom. Where was he actually? The unexpected meaning of where he was outside where the neighbors could see him. That's the first step to this whole thing, is starting to really understand joke structure, understanding those three mechanisms, understanding that there's always one thing with two meanings. One of those meanings is expected and the other is unexpected. That helps you start to see jokes. See, this is part of my system that I use for correcting jokes and working on jokes, etc. Here's the joke we're going to work on right now. The joke itself is, I just went through a long and messy separation, which ended in a divorce from my wife. So after all that, I went on a vacation to Denmark because I was having a sex change. The punchline, from very seldom to not at all. Now we have a joke. Now let's identify it. That was the the meaning, the expected meaning, unexpected meaning. Once we understand what this joke's about, you've got to get those two parts. You've got to get the expected meaning and the unexpected meaning to know how to write or rewrite the setup. First, identify the joke itself. Where's the joke at? We got all this long setup to just establish the change in sexual organs. That's a long setup. So now that we've identified it, these are the setup guidelines. These are guidelines that are part of my classes. I've not really put them out there on video or to the public in general before. So here they are. Setup only uses one idea. One main idea. A lot of people get lost by trying to put too much in a setup. It must contain or indicate an ambiguity, which we talked about last forum, which is one thing with two meanings. The job of the setup is to establish the expected meaning of the ambiguity, which is the misdirection. The next one is the setup concise with fewest words to establish that expected meaning? That's its job, but fewest words possible. It's best if it ends with the ambiguity. We'll talk about that later, maybe about processing, how quickly the audience can solve that puzzle. Every joke is like a little puzzle they have to solve because they're getting two interpretations or two meanings of one thing. Let's look at the setup. Does it just use one idea? No, I don't think so. That's a lot of ideas. That's way too many ideas for a setup. That's the first thing you need to do is look at it and go, whoa, wait a minute. Wait, your audience is just going to get lost in all of that excess information that's not relevant to the joke. Next is it must contain or indicate an ambiguity. Well, yes, it does. It's got sex change. Okay, we know that because we've already tracked that by identifying the joke. Next is to establish the expected meaning of the ambiguity. Yes, it does. There it is, expected meaning. Wow, it does that correctly. Next, the fewest words possible. Well, no, not really. It's really overwritten. And the last thing, does it end with the ambiguity? Actually, this one does. Even though it's overwritten, it does end with that one thing with two meanings. That's what you kind of do is go through and track and look at this to know what are the guidelines for writing a good setup. If you can follow those 5 guidelines that we just laid out there, you will write really good, short, crisp setups. A lot of people say, oh, you mean for one-liners? Yes. I also mean for storytelling, for observations, for opinion pieces, for late night political jokes. It doesn't matter. What I find from years of teaching is as soon as you tell people, oh, we're going to go into storytelling, they think, oh, great, I get to add a whole bunch of extra stuff that I'm seeing in the story. All it does is clutter up the jokes. It makes the jokes harder to understand. I'm always, no matter what you're doing, you're always keeping setups short and punches short. And in storytelling, it's still really, really super important to keep them short because in storytelling, you're setting up situations, you're setting up characters and actions and things happening and maybe multiple people, environments, of all those things that are inside of a story, what's relevant to the joke. And I just gave you those 5, I call them guidelines. I call them guidelines, not rules or any of those I call them guidelines, and I do it very specifically because guidelines for me are mostly true. They're there to guide you. They are not absolute. There's only a couple of things in comedy that are absolute. One of those is that there'll always be one thing with 2 meanings, an expected meaning and an unexpected meaning. That's always going to be the case in jokes. That's a law. That's a rule. Because that's what defines a joke. These other things really help you write good setups. That's what we're after today, is writing good, tight setups. We're now here for fixing setups. That's the other thing that you can do, is fix setups once you understand joke structure. Here's our setup. As we discovered earlier, it's way overwritten. We're going to fix this joke. I have 6 steps for editing setups. This also has never been put out into the public. If you're just looking at the setups, once we have it, we're going to examine one part at a time. Sometimes it's a whole sentence. Sometimes it's just a phrase. You kind of have to figure it out. Sometimes it's the whole joke, but one section at a time to kind of figure out what's going to be needed and what's not. Next thing is ask the question, what is not needed if it's overwritten? And this setup still work. It still does its job of establishing that expected meaning. Then you're going to edit that out. Then you're going to identify what is still needed to make that setup work. And then, if necessary, rewrite it. And the last is repeat the steps as you go through different parts of the joke. You need to comb through a joke many times. See, I find that this idea of a lot of people have that you write a joke and that's the end of it. And that's what I find, especially beginners and some mid-level comedians, stuff. They write a good joke and that's the end of it. The comedians that I know that are quite famous and that I've talked a lot with about things, they go over jokes over and over after every performance, sometimes for months. Steve Martin talks about going over, and he experiments with a joke for 3 to 6 months before he knows really how to make it at its funniest. Wow. That's Steve Martin. A lot of times what happens is people write a good joke. Now, I got a good joke, and then they don't go and investigate it. They don't look through it. They don't sit around and go, how can I cut it shorter? How can I make it more crisp? How can I make it easier for the audience to understand? How can I improve it in some way? And there's a lot of techniques for those as well. That's what we're after. The other thing is tagging jokes, which we're not going to talk about today. A lot of times people write a joke and that's it. Where with my students, I teach them, you write a setup and a punch, and then you tag it and tag it and tag it and tag it and tag it. So that way you can get to 5+ laughs per minute, which is a professional level. And my beginner comedians, most of them perform at 5+ laughs per minute because they know what a joke is and they know to not stop working on that joke when they've written a good joke. That's just the starting point. We're going to go with this a little bit more. Here we go. 6 steps. The first one's examine a part of it. Here's our setup. So we're going to pick apart the first sentence. Got 2 parts of it. Let's look at this. I just went through a long and messy separation, which ended in a divorce from my wife. Do we need to say all of that? First of all, do I need to say that it was a long and messy separation? That's one of the ideas that we don't need to have in there. Ask yourself, what is not needed? That's not needed. From my wife, if you get a divorce, pretty much it's going to be from a spouse of some kind. So that's just part of the joke. Edit what is not needed. We are going to edit it down from here. We got divorce. Okay, we've got that. So now all we really needed was divorce for that part of that setup. Identify what is still needed. What is still needed is after all that, which kind of puts a time frame on it. We just can't start the setup by going, divorce. We kind of got to take this part here and add it to that. And then we come into here and that means, so here we go. We're going to rewrite it. There it is. Oh, so that whole part of that setup, that long thing, all we needed to say was after my divorce. This is the grunt work of learning to be a comedian and write. People don't sit down and just nitpick a setup and a punch over and over again. Oh, look what I've got this down to so far, and I've still got some more to go for the setup. So let's repeat the steps. Come back, examine a part. This is the part we're going to examine, and we're going to ask what is not needed, and this the setup still work. So what is not needed? Almost all about. Oh, I don't need to know that you went on a vacation and went to Denmark. I don't need to know that. That's what I call rationalizations. You're rationalizing the reason that you had a sex change. The joke doesn't need you to do that. The joke does. That's not part of the joke. That's part of the performer's mind. Oh, I feel like I got to tell everybody why. No, that's the kind of stuff that really clogs jokes up and then creates problems later on. Edit what isn't needed. We're going to edit that out. What's still needed? Well, we need to say that he had a sex change. Oh, I was having a sex change. Oh, okay, that's what we need to kind of keep. But again, that's awkward language. So if necessary, rewrite. After my divorce, I had a sex change. Wow. Now, there's a tight setup. Do we need to go over the steps again? No. There's our setup. After my divorce, I had a sex change. All of that comes down. Now, there isn't any more in this than what is needed. We set the context, we got the ambiguity in there, and the expected meaning is all established by that setup. So let's go over this. Let's look at it. Here are the guidelines. We're back to the guidelines. You use one central idea? Yep. It's got one central idea. Does it contain an ambiguity, one thing with 2 meanings? Yep. Does it establish the expected meaning? Yep. Is it concise? Well, we went from there to there. Yes. That's concise. And the last thing is, does it end with the ambiguity? Yes, it does. So those are all of the guidelines. So first we identified the joke, said, oh, what's going on inside this joke? Then I went over the 5 guidelines and used those to shorten this joke. And at the end, it fits all those requirements.